I'm building under pressure. Today we'll be going over the install on our twin turbo kit for the 04 to 06 GTOs. This one's already buttoned up, so this is what you should look like when you're done. Alright, so we're going to start with removing most of the stock components. Remove the factory air filter and air box, factory manifolds. We're going to remove the battery, all the cover, as well as the front bumper and fascia off the front of the car. Now we got the first part of the assembly done. We got the front bumper cover, the coil covers, the under splash shield that goes underneath the radiator area, the upper radiator cover, intake tube, both the reservoirs, coolant and washer, and then all of the main power wiring comes out. So let's go to alternator, starter, and then battery. We'll go over another part of the video on how to take care of this part. All right, so now we have the areas behind the headlights all opened up for where turbos will be placed at on each headlight. We're going to move the ABS pump, take it off this bracket. You have 2 bolts here, 1 bolt in the back behind the actual pump, and then allow this to be movable. After that, we're going to remove the exhaust manifolds. Next, we have the ABS relocation bracket. We're just going to move this ABS pump back a couple of inches. In order to get that to move back, just going to take the lines, kind of grab them back here and give it a good solid push. And that'll get you that distance you need to get it to move back as far enough. We're going to install the ABS heat shield. We're going to leave this 1 bolt here off when we do the ABS bracket in order for the heat shield to bolt on here. When you're installing this ABS bracket, make sure you push the pump as far away from the engine as you can possibly get it. And then we'll put this heat shield on. We're gonna go ahead and remove the EVAP. So it's gonna be this line here, this connector, and there's 1 bolt here that goes to the front of the head. Just go ahead and take that off and remove the whole entire setup out of there. To remove this EVAP, there's a little clip here. Just push the clip in, and then you can slide the actual fitting off. Next, we're going to the cooling parts. We already have the upper radiator hose removed and the coolant drained. We're going to go after the heater hose lines. 2 come off the water pump. We're going to go just behind the ABS pump. We're also going to remove the fan shroud for the radiator. We are going to trim and modify this a little bit. We're going to cut off part of the mount for the driver's side fan. That's going to allow us to get our intercooler piping up through here. You may need to kind of cut, try again, cut, try again. Just kind of depends on how much you cut the first time. We will install a picture showing this in the cut form. Next, we do the coolant lines. Coolant lines are going to come a little bit long compared to what they actually need to be. We'll have some measurements actually in the video for how long you need to cut these down to. We're going to get these things cut, and then we'll get them installed and show you what they look like when they're installed. Bam! Now they're cut. A little shorter on each of the ends here, and also you can go a little bit shorter on each end here. Alright, now we got our coolant lines in for the heater core. The larger of the 2 are going to go to the actual lower back here on the valve. The smaller of 2 is going to go to the upper one on the valve. Make sure you keep these down as low as you can. You may want to put some more heat wrap right in this area, as there's a hot side of the turbo is going to sit right here. Make sure when you're putting your clamps on, that you put your clamps to where they're accessible so that you can actually get to them and tighten them up. Alright, along with the wiring for a battery relocation box, this will be going into the trunk. Along with that, we'll have 4-6 or 6mm with fender washers, and then some thread certs to go along with those. In order to install a thread cert, you'll have a tool that looks something along the lines of this. Drill a hole in the body, insert this into the body. Take your thread cert tool, put that on there, tighten that on there. Then when you tighten this bolt, it'll pull that down and lock it into the body. Alright, so back of the car, we're going to go ahead and install our battery box. What we're going to do is those thread certs we were talking about a minute ago. I'm going to look in here. We're going to install 4 thread certs along with the box. Just like that. Set your box in, mark your holes, drill some holes, And once you get those things in, use your thread start tool, install the actual thread start into the body. Then we're going to take the fender washer, and he's going to go in and hold the actual box down. All right, we're going to need to drill one hole into the side of the body right here. This is going to hold our grommet for the power cable to go through. So once you get it already hold, insert the supplied grommet, and that's where your power cable will go through. We're going to put one right here for the ground. Make sure that you clear off the actual paint so that you get a nice solid ground between the body and the connector. All right, once the thread starts inserted into the body, we can go ahead and fold the carpet back over. We'll bolt the box right on top of that. You can either cut it out for the box, whichever you prefer is not really a wrong answer here. Once we have the battery box in, all of our cables are going to be ran long. So we'll start at the battery and work our way from the battery up to the starter. We're going to get this thing started and kind of show you how we route it. All right, so now we have the power wire hanging through the body. We're going to use the supplied cushion clamps in order to attach it along the body and up towards the front. We'll kind of show you the routing that we use and then go from there. We do take 2 bolts out of this heat shield here in order to get it out of the way so we can get some more room to get this through. All right, so we got coming out of the body up there and then a cushion clamp coming on the side of the frame rail. And we're just basically going to follow the ABS lines right here all the way down to the front of the car. Come along over the top of the subframe, along the ABS. You can use a couple extra zip ties to really make sure that it stays in place and doesn't come down. All the way along brake lines. Make sure you get it behind the actual heat shield. And still go right along, all the way down. There's a little brace on the frame. We're gonna go on top of that, around to the top of the starter, and then circle it around to the main post in the starter. Alright, so once we mock all of our lines up, we'll go ahead and get them finished so that you got your ends on each end. This one's going to be a battery ground to chassis, chassis to engine, and then on the alternator and fuse box, we'll have a double wire come like this. This will go to the starter lug. This one will go to the alternator. We're going to reuse the factory cover for the alternator, and this one will go to the fuse box. Make sure you start on one end of the wire as in the start point, and then run your wire over to find your actual length. Then you'll cut it, terminate it, and then once it's all done, we'll do a final install. We're going to reuse the starter connector. So this will actually be what goes to the chassis. We'll have an eyelet on the other end, and the eyelet will go to the starter lug on the actual starter. We're just going to use the purple wire, so it's the same color, and we'll follow the fuse box wire along to the starter. Next, we're going to pull off the coil packs and the coil pack harness. We'll set those aside and get back to those in a minute. Next, we're going to pull the fuel rails. In order to put the new fuel injectors in, we recommend blowing off the intake manifold, blowing out in the crevices so you get all the dirt out before you actually pull it off so the dirt doesn't get into the engine. All right, in order to get the fuel feed line off, you will need a line tool. It looks something like this. You get it at most auto parts stores. It'll slide on here. We'll push that in. You have to push, get a little bit of warmth, get it down there, and then this will slide off. All right, now we're going to install some fuel injection connection. Fuel injectors into the rail. We need a flat tip screwdriver to pop out little clips to hold the injectors in, and then some lube in order to lube the injector O-rings whenever you go back together. All right, now we got the fuel rails on and the new fuel injectors in. Now's a good time to go ahead and replace your map sensor with a 2-bar map sensor. We'll put a part number in the description so you have that as well. We got all the prep and removal done for the top part. We'll move down to the bottom part, move some parts down there. We'll lift the car up and show you what we're gonna take off down there. We'll remove the cats out of the car and pop these guys out. We'll be cutting the factory exhaust in order to tie into the kit itself. We're gonna cut the exhaust about 1 inch in front of each O2. All right, now we're gonna work on getting the hot side prep ready to go in the car. We've got all of our hot side parts here. Both manifolds, both up pipes, and both turbos. We've already put the 4-bolt onto the turbo. We're going to seal between the turbo housing and the actual 4-bolt. with 100% silicone, and then the supplied bolts. So we'll get these things kind of mocked up and then get them set so that we can clock them and get the oil line set. All right, with the manifolds, they come supplied with new manifold 2 head bolts, as well as studs for the actual manifold to up pipe. Make sure you go and get those installed this time. Make sure you use the supplied hardware for the actual manifold. Next, we're going to install the down pipes. This one's going to be the driver's side. This one's going to be the passenger side. We're going to both these installed and show you the little pipe. We recommend you put the actual down pipes in first. Make sure you get your cats cut just in front of those O2 sensors, and just slide the down pipes onto the existing pipe, and let them just kind of hang out in here while we get the turbo and up pipe installed. The up pipe, you're gonna have a gasket that'll come along with it. There's gonna be 2 different sides on the gasket. You have one that's gonna have an open ridge, one that is gonna be a sealed ridge. Sealed ridge is gonna go towards the up pipe. The open ridge is gonna go towards the actual manifold. All right, so once you have the turbo on, you'll notice that there is movement from turbo to up pipe as well, and then as well from up pipe to manifold. There's a lot of movement in here in order to make sure everything fits. So make sure you get everything mocked up and kind of set before you actually final install everything. Like I said before, we have a lot of movement here. When you look down here in the actual, by the steering shaft.
This is my cue. I got you.
You see down there where that steering shaft goes by, the actual down pipe is the part that we're watching for. So we're gonna be close right there. We're gonna be close on the frame rail, right in here, and then close on the manifold. So before you tighten up your up pipe, you wanna make sure that everything is clear all the way down. All right, so on the passenger side, the 2 close spots we have are gonna be right here on the ABS bracket, and then right over here on the manifold itself. So before you tighten up your up pipe, just make sure that you have clearance on everything going all the way down, and you can finalize, snug your up pipe up. We have the turbos installed. We're going to put the oil feed and oil return on. For the oil return, I'm going to take the flange that is supplied with the kit. Make sure you use some thread tape on the actual NPT side. You're going to thread that in. These flanges are directional, so it'll only fit in one way. All right, for the return, on the bottom side, that actually goes to the turbo. We use a light coat of RTV. Gray or black works either well. We just put a nice, very, very thin coat on there. You do not need to glob it on there. Pro tip, when you put these into the actual flange, don't tighten them all the way down until it's actually on the turbo. They will bottom out onto the turbo on some of them. All right, now that we got both the turbos finalized, placed, everything's tight, locked down, we're gonna go ahead and put the oil return lines onto the bottom of each turbo and run them down to the center, and then we'll put our T on in order to see where exactly on the oil pan it's going to land. Once we know where on the oil pan it's going to land, we'll go ahead and drill our hole there and then get everything finalized. So now from underneath, we have both our oil return lines coming down. We're going to go ahead and install the T in between the 2 oil lines. We're going to go ahead and place it up against the oil pan and see where it lands on the actual oil pan itself. Find a spot that works, where both oil lines are going down the entire time. Once you find that spot, go ahead and mark it, and then we'll drill it and show you how to do that later in the video. Next, in the front of the engine, there's a bracket that holds on a couple of lines. We'll remove that bracket to where our oil return line is going to end up going right into here. For the oil return, we're going to have a fitting that goes right in the front of the pan. There's 2 holes where that bracket used to mount to. There's take a big tape measure and measure between them. You're looking at roughly 8 3/4 between them. We're going to put the oil return line in at 4 1/4. And then you're looking at about 1 3/4 inches down on the actual pan itself is where the location for this hole will be. All right, once we're happy with the placement of the T, we'll go ahead and tighten up the double female union. Make sure the T is straight across on the very front. Leave your lines loose so that you can make sure that they're routed in down from the very top of the turbo all the way down to the actual return. All right, we have 2 oil feed lines. One's a 135 and a 90. This one is going to be your passenger side. It's gonna be about 53 inches long from fitting to fitting. Driver's side is also gonna have a 135 and a 90. This one's gonna be about 33.5 inches from fitting to fitting. All right, the GTOs have two different oil feed options. We're gonna come with a sandwich plate, and you'll take 2 bolts out, have like a little cover, and you'll put this in the place of it, and this will sit off the side of the block. And you'll take your female, male, male T with a 1/8 to 4 fitting. 1/8 to 4 fitting will go into the 1/8 90. The female, male T will go onto that. The other option is going to be, there'll be 2 plugs in the actual oil pan, and you'll have a 1/4 inch NPT to dash 4, and that'll thread right into one of the actual plugs. All right, so this is gonna be one of the options for the actual oil feed. So you can see the 2 plugs right here. The other option, we'll use this guy here, and it'll sit in there. Something like that. These 2 bolts will have a little cover that goes over here. You'll take that cover off, put this in there, and then bolt the cover back on the top. The male, female, male, female T is gonna be in the up and down position, with a 90 on top and a 90 on the bottom going over to the passenger side along the rack. All right, so we got the passenger side line mocked up. We're gonna use a 90. It's gonna go towards the oil pan. It's gonna come underneath the transmission by the rack, go up towards the front of the car between the frame rail underneath the downpipe. All right, so now we got the driver's side feed in there as well. It'll also have the 90 on the oil pan side. We're gonna run it up along the engine, come along by the alternator, and pop it up towards the turbo right here. Now that we got the oil feeds in on both sides, make sure you check your routing. You wanna make sure that you're not touching anything that's gonna be hot. So you don't wanna have your oil feed line going right against the actual turbo hot side, obviously. You don't want to have it touching the downpipe. Watch out for things that move, as in like pulleys and steering racks and etc. So make sure everything's clear. On the driver's side, we got a lot of room to work with and a lot of play, so you have a little bit of way to move around and see which way you want to go. Same thing on the passenger side. We can have it either going around on the inside, or I'll show you, we can also move it around to the actual outside, and you just choose whichever one you like better. All right, so here on the passenger side, we got it going around the back side of the turbo to the outside of the car. Tends to work a bit cleaner, but the choice is yours as far as how you would like to route these. All right, so now that we got our oil feed and oil returns all plumbed, lined, and where we want them, we can go ahead and tighten our center cartridges. The center cartridges can have a slight angle in. Try not to go above about 15 degrees of angle. As you can see on both of these, you will have a slight angle in order to get the oil returns to clear the actual frame rails. We can trim or dent both of these frame rails in order to get them away from the actual line a little bit. Make 100% sure that whenever you are putting your oil return lines in, that you absolutely are in a down motion at all times. There's no straights, no ups. Has to be going down the entire length of the line. So we'll go and get those tightened up, and that'll be the final position for the actual turbos. If you look here, over here, the passenger side is going to be at a 90-degree angle to the frame rail, whereas the driver side will be at a 45-degree angle to the frame rail. All right, so next we're going to go over the TurboSmart wastegate install. Your TurboSmart wastegate, fire ring, a couple of fittings, and then 2 clamps. Make sure that we get on the bottom ports. You're gonna have 3 fittings. They're gonna look like this. Those are gonna be seals. We'll get those installed. Make sure you thread tape. We're gonna need a 3/16 Allen wrench in order to tighten all these. They do not come thread taped, so you will need to pull them out, thread tape them, and then reinstall them once they're thread taped. On the car, you'll figure out which port is going to work for your setup, depending on if we have one on this side or the one that's on this side. One of these ports is going to be for coolant. and the other port is going to be for the actual vacuum or boost source. Your vacuum or boost source, we're going to use one barb fitting. We'll install that in whichever side works better. For the wastegate install on the car, make sure you do not forget to install your fire ring in there before you install it onto the car. So once you have your gate all set up, all of your extra ports are all thread taped and tight, we can go ahead and install it in the car. All right, now we got the turbosonic wastegate up on the up pipe. We'll go ahead and install our dump tube on the driver's side. We're just gonna slide in right along here between the frame rail and the engine. If you see down there, can you see down there? Yeah. All right, see how we got that oil feed line is touching on the dump tube? That is not gonna work. So we're gonna need to reroute our oil feed line so we make sure we do not touch anything that's hot. So we'll get that rerouted and get this thing installed. Now we have our oil line for the feed moved, so it's not going to be quite so close to that dump tube. We'll slide this dump tube in. It goes right between the actual frame rail and the power steering line right there. Get this guy on there. Let's twist this around a little bit in order to get it right where we want it. Get that line out of the way. It should exit between the frame and the subframe. Right down in there. So get that bolted up. We do supply aluminized heat wrap along with the kits. Make sure that we're going to heat wrap anything that's going to be super close to these lines, or bend them out of the way, or remove them so that we can actually get nice clearance between heat source and anything that is meltable. All right, now we have the driver's side wastegate on, just mocked up, so we're gonna leave everything pretty loose so we can get it in there as well as we possibly can. We're gonna look right here. There is a very slight air gap in between the actual line. That is about the least amount that we can possibly get away with. Pulling these out of the way, either zip tying them or shortening the line in order to get as much of an air gap here as you possibly can is by far the best way. We want to make sure we're not touching the frame rail down there at the bottom. We also want to make sure we're not way out here and blasting the lines with the wastegate exhaust. Also watch out right here along the actual turbo hot side to dump tube clearance. You don't want that thing to be completely touching on there like this. So just make sure we get this thing moved around enough to where we're out of the way of everything. You have a nice gap between any parts that'll be meltable. Now we got the power steering cooler. We got our one clamp over here. We're gonna use a supplied bracket and then use a supplied self-tapper back in this corner over here. Push them back as far as you can. You wanna be past this line here so that you're not coming forward of the actual front of the car. All right, next we're gonna install the intercooler. We're gonna have two intercooler brackets. Both of them are the same. We're gonna have to use the supplied M10 1.25 nut and bolt combo on all four of the ones on the actual intercooler, and then we're gonna reuse the factory hardware to mount it on the top. So on the headlights, we're gonna need to trim these little tabs that come along here in order to clearance for the actual intercooler bracket that'll sit right in this general area. All right, once you got your intercooler hung, you will have some adjustment up and down on the actual intercooler brackets itself. So once you get everything, kind of leave it loose and you can move it up and down and mock it up to be where it actions. Next, we're gonna go over the intercooler piping. So start here. This is your throttle body to a 3.5 inch 90. This will have your IAT on it and the badge. So this will be your top pipe that goes right from the throttle body. From there, you'll go down, come underneath around the core support, and this will be to the intercooler. Your blow-off valve is gonna go right here. Use a Turbo Smart race port. It's gonna go right here. Make sure you do not forget to put the O-ring inside of the actual flange itself. Next, we'll do intercooler to turbo. These couplers are gonna change a little bit between the turbo selection, depending on which turbo you have, to dictate which actual coupler you have. You will notice that this one has been trimmed a little bit, as well as both for the turbo. So where the turbo inlet is, or outlet is, you will trim this down a little bit so that you can actually fit it in there. This pipe and this pipe are the exact same. Doesn't matter which side is which. The 45s go to the actual intercooler right here, and then you'll have the associated T-bolts. Again, these will change depending on which turbos you use. For the throttle body to intercooler, you're gonna have 5 3-inch, 2 3.5, and a 4-inch T-bolt. Over here we have our radiator. This is the radiator upper hose with 2 different couplers on it, and then your associated clamps to go along with it. We'll go ahead and start getting this stuff installed and kind of show you how it goes. Next, we're gonna do turbo to intercooler. The intercooler start here. He's gonna come into the frame rails, along the frame rail, up, and then to the actual turbo itself. You will need to do some trimming on the turbo side of your actual couplers. So we're gonna take off about 1 inch, roughly. Get it mocked up in there first, and then we can kind of realize how much we need to take off. All right, now that we're ready to put our intercooler piping in, we'll go ahead and get our trimmed fan shroud, go get that back installed, and then we'll go and get the intercooler piping installed around. All right, so you can see we can need to take off a bit of this coupler. So we're gonna take off about 1 inch or so in order to make it so that it doesn't touch the actual frame rail when it's going out the front. All right, in order to get a nice clean cut, take some tanner's tape, wrap it on the top of the coupler, take a razor blade, you just cut right along the tape in order to get your clean cut. Now we get it trimmed down, you can see that it'll fit on the turbo without actually touching the frame. You get it up onto that area, we're gonna get a clamp on there, and then we'll run our intercooler pipe out into the intercooler. All right, we're gonna start on the turbo side coupler first. Make sure you get the turbo side coupler on and just make sure it looks nice and centered in the hole like that before you go in and install the actual pipe itself. All right, once we have the pipe installed, we're gonna angle it slightly up towards the intercooler. Take our 45, 2.5 to 2 1/4, and get that put in there. Make sure this thing's angled up and not full-blown touching anything. It should be just out past the frame rail right here. All right, now we have all of our clamps onto our intercooler piping. Make sure you pay attention to the orientation of the actual T-bolts so that you're not poking into the headlight or poking it into the frame or doing anything along those lines. Make sure that they're accessible, that you can actually get to them. Looking at our turbos, they're gonna be driver's side, we clocked at a 45. So when you install the turbo, go ahead and clock that at a 45 at the same time. The passenger side will be at a 90-degree angle to the frame rail. So that way when you put your coupler on, it'll line up nice and easy. You're gonna center them on the frame rail whenever you're originally installing the actual turbo itself. We went ahead and put all of our wiring back together. So our wiring just runs along, clips into the factory hole. Same thing on the other side, just making sure the wiring is nice and clean and away from anything hot. When you're installing your throttle body pipe, we need to install the IAT sensor wiring as well. The IAT sensor wiring is gonna go to these 2 brown wires on the outside of the MAF. Polarity does not matter, so we'll attach these 2 wires off the pigtail for the IAT to the 2 brown wires on the MAF plug. All right, so once we have our 2 IAT wires connected, make sure when you trim it that you leave enough to go back if you ever do decide to go back to a MAF style setup. We'll just take this, kind of tuck it over here in the corner, wrap it up with some electrical tape and get it out of the way. For the steam port, we're just gonna use a factory line. We'll go from the steam port and factory location to the top of the radiator. For our coolant reservoir, we're gonna run a new line to pull along. We're gonna mount our coolant reservoir tank right back here to an existing bolt here and an existing bolt down in the bottom. We're gonna run the overflow. There's a hole right in the back of the strut tower. You can just run it right out of that. All right, we're gonna show you how to do the coils on a GTO turbo system. First things first, we're gonna unbolt the coil bracket from the valve cover. Should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bolts in it. You're gonna look something along the lines of that. And you're gonna take the coils off of the bracket. Disconnect your coil. Make sure you mark your coils. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Then take the coil back and actually flip it over 180 degrees. We'll bolt this right back down to the Coilpack bracket. This will allow us to run the spark plug wire from here go up and around the manifold down to our spark plugs. Now with all the coils removed, so we have wiring. You have a couple of clips on your wiring right here. Pop that off, pop that one off. It'll allow this bracket to come down. Take this bracket, we'll just flip it 180 degrees. So it's gonna sit in there about like this. So once you got your coils back onto the bracket, like I said, 180 degrees up, just take the actual coil bracket or wiring and mount it all to their individual coils. So again, we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. Plug all those guys back in. We do supply a roll aluminized heat wrap. We do recommend to do some kind of protection along these. You can either go like this, or you can just wrap the whole entire thing from here all the way down. Also recommend you take some zip ties. You can just attach those like this. This will give you a nice secure mount for your wiring once it's all heat wrapped. Once you got your coil bracket assembly all put back together, just slide it back in the car. Make sure you be very cautious about keeping the heat away from your coil connectors here, anywhere that's really close to the manifold. That aluminized heat wrap does a very good job of keeping the heat off of it. So once you get it done, make sure you got heat wrap in between the manifold and the actual connector itself. All right, so now we got our coil packs all built up. We have a driver and a passenger. A couple different options. You can either do it with the plastic still attached to the wiring, or we can remove the plastic from the wiring. To remove the plastic from the wiring, just take a flat tip screwdriver. There's gonna be little clips going down the sides, and you'll just pop those off. Once you get it popped off, it'll come apart, and you'll have just plain wire. Make sure that right along this, you're gonna have the manifold. So these wires will be close to the manifold. Anything you can to make sure there's some protection between the manifold, and actually don't let these touch against the manifold. We'll get them installed and show you what they look like. We're also gonna use some aluminized heat wrap, and we'll heat wrap anything that comes close to the manifold when it goes around the back and around the front of the actual exhaust manifolds. Now we got our spark plug wires all wrapped up with some heat protection on top of them. There are other options. This is just what comes included with a kit. You can also buy aftermarket stuff along the lines of like a DEI heat wrap. The heat wrap can also go over and protect it just the same way like that if you wanted to go that route. There's spark plug boots. There's a million ways that you can protect the spark plug wires from the heat of the downpipe and the manifold. Just make sure that you are keeping everything away from heat sources, so that way you don't have problems in the future of melting wires or melting connectors or whatever the case may be. Which turbo you have is going to dictate what air filter you're going to run in this kit. On the smaller turbos, we'll be able to fit a full-blown air filter on them. On the bigger turbos, we'll have to put just a screen or a mesh, turbo guard, something along those lines in order to clear back there. With the smaller turbos, you can put the air filters on and off with them on. With the bigger turbos, it's going to be a little bit more of a challenge. On this kit, we'll be offering a crash bar as an option for the kit. The crash bar will mount directly into the factory crash bar location, and we use supplied bolts in order to mount it. This is an option. If you would like it, highly recommend it, and it's cool. All right, so on this one, we put on our aftermarket crash bar. That is an option. If you're going to use that, we're not going to use the crash beam anymore, as well as this foam bumper. So this one we'll not use. Let's go ahead and install the bumper as it was. We'll use factory mounting on all the parts for the bumper. You have a couple clips on the side and a couple of screws on the side. The ones across the top, and that'll be about it. All right, we got this one all buttoned up. Go ahead and take it for a test drive, make sure everything's kosher, and have some fun. All right, so we got our install pretty much all finalized on this car. Got all your covering back on. Hot pipes are away from anything that's going to be melting anything. Make sure that you keep all of the lines that are going to be around any of the hot part. nice and cleaned up, away from everything that is going to be hot. Obviously, manifold, up pipe, turbos are all extremely hot. So just keep everything that's plastic away from it when you get the final install. This is what you should look like when you're about buttoned up. This one has already been on the dyno and is ready to go.